Both Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles spoke at the NFL Scouting Combine on Tuesday and gave us a better sense of what the Chicago Bears' offseason plan might look like for both free agency and the NFL Draft.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we are, first of all, live from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. My background, for those watching on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, is just my hotel room here. It's not my usual home setup or microphone, so I apologize if everything isn't quite as crystal clear and clean as it usually is in the podcast, but it's just this week to be on site where we got to talk to Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson, stand in the media scrum and be a part of those conversations, try and get some questions in there. And we got to learn more about how Ryan Poles sees this offseason coming together with room to be aggressive, because he feels like what the Bears need right now aligns well with what resources and players and prospects will be available in free agency and the NFL Draft. We'll also hear from Ben Johnson about some of the coaching staff philosophy of mixing all the different names he's brought in here, and including a pretty high praise for young offensive coordinator Dean Doyle, who gets compared to being another future Ben Johnson. And then we'll wrap up with some interesting comments from Ryan Poles about the future of the offensive line, and specifically Braxton Jones at left tackle, and Ryan Poles very clearly leaving the door open for some competition at that position this upcoming year. But I want to start a little bit more bigger picture with what Ryan Poles said about how he can try and be a little bit more aggressive this offseason than maybe we've seen in years past, where he's not going to go crazy and sign a bunch of big-name free agents to huge contracts, but feeling like this team is a little bit closer to be able to do that now. The team has the space to be able to do that now, and maybe more importantly, what the team needs is aligning better with what is available for them to be able to fill those needs through both free agency and the draft. And so while I hesitate to read too much into this and say, oh, this definitely means he's going to sign X, Y, and Z player, I do think it is notable shift in where I think they usually have been at this point in the process. And so it's a sign that, hey, maybe they can go not all in, but a little bit more aggressive on all right, let's make the move and get this team up to high level contention this season. Here's my own shot video footage and audio of Ryan Poles from the press conference today.
Ryan, you've understandably been a little bit more cautious in free agencies as you built this roster through the draft. What's your willingness to be more aggressive at the top of the market this year?
Yeah, I think the clearer the vision, the more aggressive you can be, and that's important. So you want to be selective in free agency, because you just historically, if you look at it, it can tell you, and you can learn from that. But if there's certain players that kind of hit all the check boxes that you need, there's really no reason to hold back. I feel like you can be aggressive in this situation.
When you were in camp, with DeMarcus off the roster, and just knowing that the strength of this draft is the defensive line, but there's also a couple names out there in free agency, guys who've requested trades and some other free agent options. How do you go about weighing how and when you will attack addressing that spot opposite Montez?
Yeah, that's part of what we're doing now. Again, it's a big puzzle. Free agency comes first. There's a lot of unknowns in the draft in terms of who's going to be there for you. I've talked about that before. You can have philosophical beliefs in how you build a football team, how you prioritize, but the supply has to match the needs, and those opportunities have to present themselves at the right time. So we're starting to put that puzzle piece together. But what I like about really the pairing so far of free agency and the draft is I do believe that the supply of players are matching our needs. So there's going to be good opportunities.
So Ryan Poles, I think, has surveyed the landscape of like, okay, here's what we're expecting to be available in free agency. Here's what we're seeing out of this NFL draft class. And I think it gives him some more confidence and more flexibility in how they're approaching this plan. Because when you think about like position by position, what he said at the end there, supply and demand, like what the Bears need, that being the demand, and then what is available to them, that being the supply, right? We know that it's a strong draft for the defensive line. It's extremely deep there, and it's a pretty decent free agent crop of defensive linemen as it stands right now before guys start to get re-signed. And so maybe that's the type of landscape that gives Ryan Poles more confidence to release someone like DeMarcus Walker and feel like we're going to have opportunities in free agency and the draft to add defensive linemen to rebuild that group. So we can afford to move on from someone like DeMarcus Walker at this stage of the process, even though, they could have afforded to keep him they can afford to have kept him. The double past tense words there is tough, but you get what I mean, right? They didn't have to cut DeMarcus Walker, but I think they look at this landscape and say, we needed to upgrade anyway, and we've got a lot of different opportunities to be able to upgrade at position like that, so it should align nicely for them. Same thing on the offensive line, right? Like there are plenty is a strong word, but like there are free agent guard options that are very good. There are plenty of guards and centers in the draft to like. It's a good offensive line class on the interior there. So you can feel like, man, it's not that he goes in the offseason saying, I have a specific plan of we're going to sign these 3 guys and that's going to be the option, but he can go in and say, we've got 3 or 4 options in free agency and maybe 3 or 4 options in the draft that we like. And if we can just get like one of each of those guys, something along those lines, you can feel good about where you are this offseason from a team building standpoint there. I think the one area that it doesn't align very well is certainly like the center position in free agency is not particularly deep there. There's not a lot of starting caliber talent that you feel like is a really good, secure center upgrade, but there's guys in the draft, and there's still some names to like there. And then the tight end group in free agency is pretty weak, but it's a good tight end draft class for them to add guys to be backups for Cole Kmet. They've got options at wide receiver. Like everywhere you look on this Bears team where the needs lie, they should have, with the exception of maybe center and tight end, they should have a variety of options in both free agency and the draft. And at least at center and tight end, there are good options for you in the draft. And there's a few names in free agency. It just might be a little bit more slim pickings there. So that's where I think when he talks about being able to be aggressive, maybe releasing DeMarcus Walker is a little bit more of an aggressive move, as opposed to keeping around would be more conservative to just kind of say, hey, let's keep our options in front of us. He can say, no, let's clear that up because we can go out and get guys. That doesn't mean they're going to pay a $25 million a year contract to Josh Sweat or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be aggressive in terms of overspending on the top guys, but it does give them the room to do so. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if Ryan Poles ends up spending a little bit more this offseason than he typically has in free agency, but that doesn't mean going over the top and signing multiple big name guys to all these big deals, because even he admitted in his press conference, like, free agency doesn't usually work out, right? There's a track record there of big signings not necessarily being the smartest decisions for those teams. So he's always going to be smart about it. And maybe that means also being aggressive in the draft. If that's moving up in the first round or moving up with your second round picks or whatever it might be, like, it's not that the plan is to be aggressive. It's that the resources the Bears have and the players that are available to them give them the freedom, flexibility, and confidence to be aggressive if the right situation presents itself. And I think that's more, the Bears are better positioned to do that now than they have been in years past, given where they are in the team building process and what kind of resources they have available to them. It helps having a brand new coaching staff that maybe you want to make a big splash for. And I thought Ben Johnson at his combine press conference made some good points about how this staff came together and gives us a little peek behind the curtain on how some of these guys he hasn't worked with before ended up coming with him to Chicago. So we'll hear more about Ben Johnson's staff coming together and some of the things he needs to keep an eye on moving forward next on Locked On Bears. This NFL Combine press conference was the first time we've actually gotten to hear from Ben Johnson since he assembled his Bears coaching staff. He had his press conference and media tour when he got first hired, but that was before Dennis Allen was made official. It was before any of us knew who Declan Doyle was. And of course, now you add Eric Bieniemy and Press Taylor and all these different coaches come together on this coaching staff. And we hadn't really been able to hear specifically from Ben Johnson up to that point about what that was going to entail and how those guys came together and what this process was going to look like. And so he gave a pretty decent explanation on how he went outside of his own comfort zone to bring guys in. And in his words, like, didn't just hire a bunch of my friends or a bunch of the guys that, he was super, super close with, but wanted to get a mix of people with different experiences and different backgrounds. And that can be a very good thing, and it can be a tricky thing. And I think what it's going to be either way is a test of Ben Johnson's leadership ability as a head coach. But here's how he explains the coaching staff coming together, and then I actually cut together two different Ben Johnson quotes here. So these didn't actually happen in chronological order here, but the first one is him talking about the staff coming together, and then the second part of this quote is how he got specifically in touch with Declan Doyle. It's hard to hear the audio of the question being asked because it's the media asking the questions are not mic'd up, so it's just sort of me standing there recording it. But he was asked, how he came across Declan Doyle as his offensive coordinator, and he tells the story of the recommendation he got and the specifics of the recommendation he got to hire Doyle to be his offensive coordinator in Chicago.
Listen, what's so beautiful about the coaching staff that we put together is I didn't hire a bunch of my friends. I went outside of my circle on purpose because I wanted to collect a different mix of experience, of energy, ideas, and we're all going to make it come together, and it's going to be the Chicago Bears going forward. And so it can look a number of different ways. Eric Bieniemy's got a lot of experience in the gun run game and what they did in Kansas City, obviously. And Declan has a lot of success from the Sean Payton tree, and Press Taylor has a lot of success from the Chip Kelly all the way on. And so we've got a lot of library, if you will, to draw from, and we'll see it all come together once we get our hands on these guys.
Ben, what do you remember with the time of John Moore?
Declan, so great story about him. I ended up calling John Morton, who took the OC job at Detroit. He'd worked with Declan the last couple of years, and I asked him, I said, hey, how's Declan doing? Is he ready to be a coordinator? He said, Ben, listen, he's another Ben Johnson, which I think that's a good thing. I'm banking on that being a good thing. So, listen, I think he and I are a match made in heaven. He thinks very much like me. It's been awesome getting him into the building the last few weeks, and extremely detailed, extremely organized. The age does not matter. He is going to be respected by not only the players, but also his fellow coaches as well. I can already see that coming into place with the coaching staff meetings that we're having right now. He's very well informed. It's just like anybody, if you can help make the people around you better, they're going to find value in you. And so that's what Declan's bringing to the table for us right now.
So I think a couple of key points there from Ben Johnson that I might have to separate a little bit here. But like, one is when he talks about not hiring his friends, right? And like, Eric Bieniemy and his background with the Chiefs and Press Taylor with the Jaguars and, et cetera, like that can be a very good thing to have guys with different backgrounds and different perspectives to say, hey, Ben Johnson usually does it this way, but this guy can offer a different idea on how to do it, and maybe doing it slightly differently would be better. Instead of if he had hired all, Lions offensive coaches, that they would just try and do everything in the same Lions way, and that worked very well in Detroit, and maybe it would work really well in Chicago, but to be able to add different voices in there and different ideas gives you a broader spectrum to work from, and then take the best ideas of everybody, but not all those ideas are going to come from the exact same place and the exact same philosophy that they had in Detroit, right? That's sort of the way you can balance that on either side. It's nice to have a variety of opinions, but at the same time, then you need to take a guy from the Chiefs and a guy from the Jaguars and a guy from the Broncos and align them to have one consistent, coherent offensive identity to fall in line, and to not say, well, I want to do things this way because this is how I've always done it on my previous team, and we're going to make you align to me. Like, there can be sort of too many cooks in the kitchen, right? It felt that way early on in the Matt Eberflus era with Luke Getsy, where Eberflus and Getsy had never worked together. So you hire Getsy from the Packers, you hire the wide receivers coach Tyke Tolbert comes from the Chargers, the Giants, or whatever it was. You had offensive line coach Chris Morgan comes over from what I think he'd been with the Steelers, and quarterbacks coach Andrew Janocko comes over from the Minnesota Vikings. Like, the entire offensive staff hadn't worked together and hadn't worked with Matt Eberflus, and there wasn't much of an offensive identity as a result. You had a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas trying to do things in different ways. It's up to the head coach to align all of that and to make sure that there isn't division or disagreement or anybody doing anything different, that it's all still kind of done the same way. It doesn't mean it's the Ben Johnson way, but they just have to all agree on what that way is. Then I think you start to mix in Declan Doyle here as a 28-year-old offensive coordinator. Like, just to be 100% honest, like, I'm currently 28 years old. Declan Doyle is the same age I am right now, and that's kind of crazy to be an offensive coordinator at like my own current age. But anyway, like, he makes the good point there, though, that, like, yeah, he's 28, but just because he's young doesn't mean people won't respect him. Like, if as soon as you realize he is helping you be better as a coach, as a player, whatever your role is, as soon as you realize, oh, this guy's smart and knows what he's talking about, like, at the end of the day, like, ability and success will justify itself. And if he's great, then it won't matter at all that he's 28. And if he's bad, well, it won't really matter at all if he's 28. You're bad at the age of 28. You're bad at the age of 58, right? Like, at the end of the day, the age shouldn't be a big deal. Like, yes, he has a lack of experience is kind of where the big deal is, right? Like, when it's interesting that the Lions coach, right, calls him another Ben Johnson, because, like, Doyle is even more accelerated than what Ben Johnson was, right? Like, Ben Johnson's young and was fast and a quickly ascending offensive coach, but Ben Johnson was in the NFL, I think, a decade before he became an offensive coordinator. And I think he became an offensive coordinator, I did the math earlier and I lost it already, at age, I don't remember what it was, 34, 32, 36, something along those lines. Like, Ben Johnson was 6 years older than Declan Doyle when Ben Johnson became an NFL offensive coordinator. And Ben Johnson spent a decade as an assistant coach before he got that offensive coordinator role. Declan Doyle had 2 seasons as the Broncos tight ends coach, and then before that it was 3 seasons as an offensive assistant with the New Orleans Saints. Like, that's it. He's had 5 years in the NFL and only 2 years as an actual position coach, and now he's an offensive coordinator. Like, that's even faster of an ascent than Ben Johnson. And now, obviously, like, clearly I think the connection there, the comparison is more about the brain, how he sees the game, the offensive mind, the innovation, the things he's able to do in that regard. That's supposed to make Declan Doyle the next Ben Johnson. But I also think we should give the kid some patience and some benefit of the doubt here. Like, he doesn't need to be Ben Johnson. That's okay. He's already super successful and is carving out his own path, and it's okay if he's not the next Ben Johnson. I think the hard part is that on the outside, we're not going to have much of a clear sense of exactly what Declan Doyle's influence on this offense is, because he's not going to be a play-calling offensive coordinator. He's going to have all the influence in the meeting rooms and stuff, but, like, game day, how is he shaping this offense? We really don't know exactly what that's going to look like, so it's going to be hard for us to tell, like, how good or not Declan Doyle is, because at the end of the day, it's Ben Johnson's offense. He's calling the plays. He's responsible for the success and failure that this offense has. Now, if this offense is great, could that lead to Declan Doyle being eventually hired away as a head coach? I mean, the fact that he's not a play-calling offensive coordinator helps the Bears. The teams are less likely to want to hire an offensive coordinator to be their head coach if that coordinator hasn't called plays. But that hasn't fully stopped teams in the past either. Matt Nagy, famously, didn't call plays much in Kansas City. Dabbled in it occasionally when he was given some opportunities, but never a full-time play caller in Kansas City. Didn't work out as head coach either, but didn't stop him from getting the head coach opportunity. So that's something to keep an eye on long-term with Declan Doyle. But hey, let's slow down. Let's just get to having a good Bears offense first. I think that would be a nice first step that we could all enjoy and see on the field and take advantage of. In order to do so, the offensive line is going to need to be a lot better. And both Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles left the door open for some pretty significant change on the offensive line this offseason, including potentially at left tackle replacing or at least adding competition against Braxton Jones. We'll hear what Ryan Poles said about that, and also we'll talk about what Ben Johnson said about overhauling an offensive line even in one offseason next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss opening tip-off, or say you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can always stay in the action. And if you're looking for an even bigger payout, you can combine those live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting just keeps every moment of the game exciting. You never feel like you missed your opportunity to get in on the action. Plus, the app is super easy to use, so when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. The success of Ben Johnson's offense is going to hinge on this offensive line. It's no secret. The Bears have talked about it as a need. Ben Johnson has talked about it as a group that needs to play better next season. And of course, play better next season means get more talent there next season. It's obvious when you have all of your interior linemen except for Ryan Bates entering free agency, there's going to be some amount of change and turnover at that position. It's just a matter of how much. And Ben Johnson was asked about that a little bit, like, hey, all three of these guys are free agents. Can you turn over that whole position group in one offseason? And he's like, yeah, we've seen it done before. And he was very quick to answer that. Like, he's like, yeah, well, absolutely. Like, he very much made it sound like if you want to read between the lines and maybe read too much between the lines, like, there was no hesitation there, as though maybe the plan is to turn over all three of those starting spots. It should be anyway, but they would never outright admit that. But clearly, it seems like, yeah, Tevin Jenkins probably not coming back. Coleman Shelton probably not coming back. Matt Pryor not coming back as a starter, that's for sure, but maybe as a backup. It's not totally out of the question there. But there's going to be change on the interior of this offensive line. We've seen it get done, and I think we're going to see a brand new guard, center, and guard starting for the Bears this season compared to what they had there last season. That leaves the question then of left tackle, because Ben Johnson said, even he said, like, you're not going to replace all five guys here. This is not a complete top-to-bottom overhaul. Of course, Darnell Wright is good. You're super set there. And I think Braxton Jones is generally better than a lot of Chicago Bears fans give him credit for. But Ryan Poles was asked specifically about his evaluation of Braxton Jones and where that sort of stands as they go through this offensive line rebuilding process. And he certainly left the door open for, well, he didn't even leave the door. He said there's going to be competition at that position. So I want you to hear what Ryan Poles said, but then I want to think about it a little bit more deeply than just, this means they're going to sign a big-name free agent left tackle. I don't know if it's that clear cut.
Now that you guys have been able to review the season, what do you think of how Braxton Jones performed, kind of where he's at? Do you have a medical update on him?
Yeah, I think Braxton did a good job. Obviously, you never want guys to go through injuries, and we got to see how he comes on the other side of this. I know everything's been progressing on schedule, and he's doing a good job with that. And he's been very active with rehabbing and get back on his feet. So I think, again, that's another spot where it's going to be competition, and you build the best five, or the line with the best five guys. So we'll see how that goes through this offseason and training camp.
I think the initial interpretation there, like as soon as you hear it, the first thought is, oh boy, like Braxton Jones must be on thin ice. Also, my first impression was like, is that injury more severe than we thought it was? Like, I know it was like an ankle thing, and it looked pretty bad, but the initial reporting on Braxton Jones' ankle was that it didn't fracture I don't know if it's the tibia or the fibia. I don't know my bones very well, but like the initial reporting from Ian Rappaport was that the injury wasn't as severe as it could have been, and in that initial reporting, the thought was he'll be ready by training camp. Was the idea that he's gonna undergo surgery, and that if everything progresses on the normal timeline, then he'd be ready to go for training camp. So that means, Braxton Jones won't be ready for OTAs and minicamp, and that's not the end of the world there. But this is the way Ryan Poles is like, well, we got to see how he comes out the other side. It's like, is he okay? Like, to me that like added some doubt. Like, is he gonna, like, is there a chance he can't play after this injury? Like, it should be in theory fine. So I don't know why. Maybe it's just being overly cautious from Ryan Poles. But then it's like, yeah, we're gonna have competition at that position. the initial feeling there is like, oh, wow, Jones is on thin ice. They're going to go out and sign a free agent or whatever it's going to be. They're going to get a left tackle upgrade, and they're really going to push Braxton Jones. And that could be the case, and I'm not saying that won't happen. But isn't the competition already there? Isn't it already on the roster? Isn't Karan Amagaji already the left tackle competition? Like, there's going to be competition at left tackle. Yeah, you drafted a left tackle last year in the third round. Like, they're going to call that an open competition. And yeah, it's very possible. It's real that if Karan Amagaji has a great offseason and a great training camp, that he could unseat Braxton Jones as the starting left tackle. Do I think that's likely? No. But it's going to be a competition. They're going to give both guys an opportunity to start at left tackle. And so there's going to be competition for Braxton Jones. That Ryan Poles is right. I'm surprised he didn't just specifically say Karan Amagaji when he's talking about the competition there. That's the one thing I'm kind of stuck on, is like it implies there could be additional competition there. But when you just use a third-round pick on a left tackle last season and you have Braxton Jones, are you going to go out and use – I don't think you're going to go out and sign a big free agent contract for left tackle. You know, Ronnie Stanley from the Ravens or Cam Robinson from the Vikings and previously the Jaguars. Like, it would seem strange for me that they would invest a big contract at that position after just having used a third-round pick at that position and having an adequate starter already at that position in Braxton Jones. So I suspect that the Braxton Jones competition will pretty much just be Karan Amagaji. Maybe they still have to sign another backup offensive tackle, you know, a Larry Borum replacement, if you will, and maybe that player will also be part of the competition at left tackle. But realistically, this is a two-man race to start a left tackle, Braxton Jones versus Karan Amagaji, and Jones is very clearly well ahead of that, and Karan Amagaji very clearly still has a long way to go. But if Jones is going to be injured up until training camp, and if there's any delay in that recovery and he's not ready at the start of training camp, is that the opportunity for a change to be made there? Maybe, but I don't think you go in this offseason saying we're going to make a big splash upgrade there when you've got to get two guards and a center and a defensive end and a number 2 tight end and a number 3 wide receiver. Like, all of a sudden, yeah, it'd be great if you could draft Joe Alt with the 10th overall pick. Absolutely. Wouldn't that be nice? But, like, the Bears have bigger fish to fry at this point, and I don't know. It's left tackle at that point becomes a little bit more of a luxury than a necessity, and maybe if you could fill all those holes in free agency, then you can go with luxury and take a tackle or take a running back in the first round or whatever it might be. But, like, you got to get pass rushers, guards, centers. You know, you got to get this stuff squared away. And of course, it comes back to sort of the best play available versus need debate, which I think is presented as a binary that's not always so binary, and we're going to have plenty of time to talk about what the Bears should do with the 10th overall pick in the draft all throughout this process. We're going to hear from some of the players that could be those 10th overall pick prospects this week at the Combine. The defensive lineman talk Wednesday morning as this podcast comes out. We're going to try and get some audio from those guys. We'll see. I can't promise exactly who I'm going to hear from or what they're going to say, but we'll see what the Combine presents. That's the fun part about being down here in Indianapolis. But make sure you're coming back for another episode of Locked On Bears tomorrow, live from Indy, from the Combine, for more daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to keep up with all of that daily Bears analysis. And I hope that in exchange, by subscribing and tuning in and coming along with us on the road in Indy, that you'll at least get another opportunity to bear down.